Hey everybody, we're going to talk about media real quick and how media is going to play a role in government. We're going to see media as a linkage institution, as well as kind of like almost a fourth branch of government in a way. Okay, we're kind of step this really, really fast. Goes along with your reading in your AMSCO book. So there's four kinds of media we have to know: mass media, which is basically media that reaches a large number of people, right, outside like a local kind of area. So you have your local media, you have your mass media, right, countrywide kind of stuff, and we can break it down into three forms of media from there, right? Medium of media, whatever. Anyway, broadcast. So that's anything that's going to be, verbal. So your film, radio, TV, that's going to be that broadcast type media that is present there. Okay. You're going to have your print media. So print media is going to be anything that comes out, books, magazines, newspapers. So newspapers, I don't feel even read newspapers on print anymore. News magazines used to be pretty prolific, right? Time, Newsweek, that kind of stuff. Newsweek is not in print anymore. Only Time is still in print. I still get it if you want to borrow it. Social media is our biggest thing, which is our online interactive content, right? It's not just that you have stuff online, but that you can generate user content. So like that people can post stuff, share stuff, those kind of things play a big role there, that media. So media's changed a lot is the main thing. Prior to the 60s, media worked with government. Okay, they shared information. The government would give media info, kind of give them the scoop, if you will, and get that information out to people that way. They reported the facts. They did not report on the people and the things happening. A lot of times the media would know government was maybe doing things that were sketch, and they would let it go. They let it slide because that was what you were supposed to do. They may have known about presidents having affairs. It happened. Trust me, okay? And they may just not do those kind of things because that's not how it worked. Things change in the 60s, all right? Vietnam was a big part of that. With Vietnam, you had embedded reporters sharing what actually happened live on TV and calling out the government on things that happened, right? The My Lai massacre is a great example when the media brought attention to things that are going down. Watergate in the 70s is another thing, too, where you have the first idea of investigative journalism. It was Woodward and Bernstein working for the Washington Post who got secret tips and anonymous sources that said that, hey, there's sketchy stuff going on in the White House. And then they investigated and found what was actually going on and happening. And so within that, right, we kind of see this new idea of looking into the government and not necessarily working with them, but working against them is what it comes down to being. And essentially becoming a detective to look at scandals and things government's doing. So that's where we're going to put government and media now at odds a little bit in that they aren't going to be able to like work together as much anymore because there's that question of like, are you checking up on me or are you working with me kind of situation? And so it kind of makes the media what we call the fourth branch now in that they are a watchdog of politicians. They're there to like call out politicians when they feel things aren't going amazing, aren't going awesome. And so they're there to kind of like, call people out and say, why aren't you doing these certain things or why are you doing things the correct way? And so that's where you see this media now become this watchdog. Lewinsky scandal was a great thing with Bill Clinton. As I said before, presidents had affairs before. It was unfortunately pretty common. But the media called this one out, right? They called out the president on this one as they're investigating other scandals they had with real estate, all those other kind of things. And when the president lied about it, then it got brought into court and he lied about it in court and then got impeached for it and those kind of situations. So it's kind of those examples of like looking to those private lives of politicians more than they ever did before. We definitely saw that a lot now with like Biden and Trump and Clinton and so on and so forth, where those things are, the private life is so much more of a big part of news coverage. The FCC is there to regulate the airwaves and make sure that everyone's following the right rules for you can put on the air. Not only is it looking at like censorship, those kind of things, but also regulating truth versus opinion, all that kind of stuff. It used to be that before the 80s that you had to give both Democrats and Republicans the same amount of time on a news program. That was lifted underneath President Reagan. I want to say 87, I want to say it was. And that allowed the creation of like single issue shows and single issue networks that only focused on one side versus both sides. So that's when like shows like Rush Limbaugh, who passed away recently, got his start was because the FCC changed those rules and you could have a single focused program versus having to show both sides of the issues. So how are times changing in media now? Number one is that the news magazine is done. I mean, it's pretty much done. There aren't these print news magazines come out. I get Time instead; it comes out every week. But most of these things have gone online now, and people aren't reading print newspapers anymore. Honestly, I can't tell you last time I read a print newspaper. My parents took the Sunday paper, but that's really all they get yet. And those kind of things. We don't see people trusting news anchors anymore. Brian Williams on NBC was supposed to be the most trusted man in America, and then he lied about stuff that he did in Iraq when he was embedded with soldiers. And so it's like, we actually trust our news people. And the question of, are you just sharing the news? Are you sharing opinion? And so we don't see news anchors as being super trustworthy as we used to anymore. We also now see social media and the rise of the meme, and that, we see these short little bits of news that are shared. And the question is, are they true or not true? And I know I hear you guys talk about, I saw this on Snapchat, I saw this on Instagram, so on and so forth. That's where a lot of people get their news now. And the question is the media an enemy of the people, or is it the friend of the people? We kind of saw the media with at least the Trump administration for sure. This question of, well, is the news really helping people or not, is kind of the big, kind of that question, if you will, of that part of it. Here we see the newspaper kind of go down as of 2010. A lot less people are reading the print newspapers or daily print newspapers that peaked in the late 80s, early 90s. Now TV is by far a preferred medium. Kind of shows that we don't want to read long things, kind of digest little itty bitty parts of it instead. We also looking at our online as being a major media source to it now, instead of looking at that print newspaper. So typically about 20% of people get their news from a print source. You can see it's older people now that kind of focus on TV and print sources, where younger people are mostly those online sources to get their information that way for the media. Obviously looks at that in terms of ideology as well. We're looking at this 2016 numbers. It's kind of a cool graph showing like where did supporters get information. Like Clinton supporters got it from newspapers and from the national news, ABC, NBC, so on and so forth. Cable, right, was more Trump supporters, like Fox News, for example. The internet was more Bernie Sanders supporters. So it was interesting to see where these followers got their information from and like got their things. Ted Cruz supporters was more radio based, so it might be more like, a Rush Limbaugh type show type situation. So it's kind of interesting to kind of see where those parts come from that way. Obviously, the new frontiers are our thing in terms of online stuff. And, with conspiracy theories, all that kind of thing, we see different news personalities that are out there. Anybody can get on YouTube now and post stuff. The Alex Jones channel, Alex Jones Show is a good example of this, who's a conservative guy, does InfoWars, which is a lot about conspiracy theories, those kind of things that are out there. And, we kind of see where people believing these things a lot more than they used to, because there's so much more information out there and people putting more information available for people online. So the question is, what should news really be? Well, it should represent your public interest. So it's supposed to be that linkage between the public and government. People should be bringing up issues, complaining, bring attention to things. And because it's in the media, then the government should want to take care of it and fix it. It's also supposed to be providing information, educating our people, and helping them know more of what's going on. We're talking about that watchdog power with investigative journalism too, of kind of checking the government and being like, hey, what are you actually doing? And letting people know what's actually happening out there. So we talk about different examples of what it once was, right? With muckrakers. Muckrakers are those journalists who would investigate, sketchy things going on in not only government, mostly in business, more into that. You have FDR's fireside chats where he would sit down with his little dog Fala and share things on the radio. We also have the civil rights movement of, speeches and showing the marches, that kind of stuff, or the Army McCarthy hearings with, showing that Joseph McCarthy was accusing communists. Unsafe at any speed. It's kind of a very interesting piece to it. Where a couple of young lawyers looked at the safety of vehicles and that kind of stuff, and how safe certain cars were, and how certain cars were basically like not safe at all in terms of like surviving crashes, that kind of stuff. Ralph Nader, who later ran for president, was a very like influential person in this party. Kind of showed up in a threadbare suit and didn't really look very professional, but he brought all this information on how we need seatbelts and how cars are basically death traps. The My Lai massacre in Vietnam and Watergate were like big things of investigative journalism showing that, there are things happening in the government that aren't being taken care of, that aren't right. Iran-Contra, about how the U.S. government is selling weapons to Iran to supply the Contras in Nicaragua. So like some of these things that maybe aren't supposed to be happening. Things that during the Iraq wars in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, with treatment of prisoners and torture, those kind of things. It's kind of like some of the news that it was in terms of like that watchdog type journalism pieces that were out there. So really there's two roles for a media. One is agenda setting and then issue framing. So number one is that basically showing what issues are worthy to talk about and what kind of things should people be thinking about. Hard part is that as a reporter, as a news industry, they can't report on every single thing out there. And so they have to pick what I think is most important for us to pick on. I always joke about slow news days. Sometimes what's in the news, like, why are you talking about this? Well, maybe it's just all you got at the moment. That's why. But, really talk about, who decides what's newsworthy. And it's the editors who tell that, because they're the ones that are like, okay, I need people to watch my news, buy my paper, whatever. That's what's going to be newsworthy. And it was fun because I had a roommate who was a journalism major, and he was, working in radio news. And he was like, yeah, well, whatever my editor tells me to cover is what I'm going to cover that day, because it's what's most newsworthy. They also have issue framing. They tell us what angle or kind of tell the story. And so every station may have a different angle or bias they take on it. Fox News will be very different than CNN or NBC, and so on and so forth, as they highlight certain details. It might be the same story, but the details tell you different things that are going on. Within that, too, you're looking at the idea of narrowcasting and stuff, in that profits are really driving things more. So instead of trying to bring things together, we're now kind of dividing and trying to get people to look at stuff a lot more this way. And so part of the thing is to looking at, how do we kind of divide people up? Let's say you're going to watch mine or watch their kind of news. And so you focus on breaking news. Who breaks the story first, so you can put the main spin on it, and how do you get people to watch things? As Americans, we seem to love scandal. We seem to love violence and sex and all that kind of stuff. And so you have this like hyper focus on violence, almost like bad things that are happening in the world. And it kind of gets people's attention that way. We also have a horse race journalism. So how can you, like, horse races, like, you're kind of calling out one better than the other. We would kind of like divide those politicians up and kind of, support one or the other, kind of support one view over another view. And you really focus that way on one thing or another. So here's on here now, so narrowcasting, right? NBC versus Fox News, kind of what information they're going to hear. They may leave certain things out. And a lot of it's because they need to make profit, they need to make money. And as part of it, they have home companies, right? So ABC is owned by Disney, NBC by GE, and so on and so forth, in that, they want to make money, right? And the more money they make is based on how many people actually watch their news, click on their websites, all that kind of stuff. It's driven by the advertising, driven by the ratings. They can make money off of it. And really, networks are very afraid to bore their audience. If you're boring, nobody's going to watch you. I'm sure I'm boring, so people are probably turning me off or turning me on silent as it is. And so the networks are really afraid to, bore their audience, so they want to keep things as short as humanly possible. Humans have, unfortunately, somewhat short attention span, squirrel, and they want it as a short soundbite versus anything else. And so we kind of call this a faux debate, right, or a fake debate, right? So we look at a lot of analysis instead of actual reporting. We see a lot more about, opinion kind of based news things versus just the information. We see a lot more talking points versus like full stories. And we have this idea that we're down the middle or equal news stories when they really aren't. And so, like, every debate has two sides of legitimacy, and it's, we don't always follow that. We always have these politicos and pundits on news and all that kind of stuff. Then we get the idea of what is fake news, right? Is my side right than other people's side? And the idea of how many, like, when you have a speech or you have somebody say something, how much do you actually hear that speech? And so maybe when we play 10 seconds of something, and the context of what's being taken in that is that hard soundbite. And this kind of a cool little thing is that most stories are 30 seconds or less. The problem with stories are 30 seconds less. You can't show all sides. You only show one little part of it and may miss part of that story. And so there's lack of depth, lack of policy, and really lack of information given in those really short little stories. The typical news story used to be almost 60 seconds long, and now it's down to underneath 10 seconds. And so you can look at YouTube for more drawn out, longer parts of it, right? But you also have the idea of Twitter, which is 140 characters or less, and like, I want to see a bunch of stuff very, very quickly, very, very short attention span kind of situation. We also have our basis instinct. So, like, essentially, once again, we have to get people to watch things, right? So we do a lot of things with violence. There's a joke in media, I guess: if it bleeds, it leads. So essentially, how can we get people in with kind of scary, grisly stories, that kind of stuff? A lot of celebrity gossip of missing people, in terms of, like, who do you share information about, people that miss, that kind of stuff. Easy stories that get people going that way. This is a really interesting graph that was posted about how crime rates have actually gone down since 2006, but the fear of crime has gone way up because we like to worry about crime. Because what do we actually hear in the news ever? We don't ever hear bad stuff happening, like crime, that kind of stuff. I mean, it happens very often, but we hear a hell of a lot about it as we go through things. So here's kind of what is most common from the 90s, right, in terms of our stories, is that most of the stories we hear was, about crime. We hear about, other different things that are happening crime-wise was a majority of our news programming. So we didn't hear, it was basically crime and then disasters and then weather and sports. That's really about it. I will say that, we have had an increase in violence, yes, but regardless of that part. Also, consolidation is a big issue. So we might be concerned about media mergers. So we see all these different big companies kind of bringing all these different news channels underneath one umbrella, if you will. And so we kind of see that there is less and less independent news organizations out there. So really the number of views we get of stories and information is getting less and less and less and less and less. And so we have, basically 5 big channels now. You have your Disney, your Viacom, your AOL, your News Corp, Clear Channel, which have, very different things on them, but they're going to be under kind of one big umbrella that covers a lot of things. And Disney is slowly taking over the world. Here's 2018. We kind of see most of our stuff that's on here. Like Disney, owns parts of 21st Century Fox. AT&T owns part of Time Warner. Comcast owns a lot of broadband stuff, online things. In terms of our cable channels, that kind of stuff. And you see things going to Hulu and Netflix. Obviously, it's even more and more now as we get into like more streaming services that are out there. So this is where bias kind of gets kind of crazy about how things get, that kind of weird. And you kind of see like selection and omission. So you only bring certain things out. The little cartoon here, I love babies. Well, it means you're a pedophile, so on and so forth. Like you take little sound bits and stuff, and so you only play certain things or you omit certain things people said, so you don't get the whole entire story about it. The placement thing is always huge. I'll show you guys an example of this in class about like where you place stories, like where you place them in certain parts. You place at the very lead of your newscast, at the very end of your newscast, very top of your website, very end of your website, wherever it might be. Headline are huge in terms of like, in photos. You may show very flattering photos of one party and very non-flattering photos of another party. How statistics are done that way. You might see some stuff in there too. All those kind of things are parts of it that will play a role in kind of how that bias comes in. And you'll see different biases come from different areas that way. Just real quick, a couple more things we have here in terms of like, this is back in 12, but you kind of see like negative tone versus positive tones. And you kind of see different stations running different tones for different people. So like CNN ran much more positive stuff for, Obama versus, Romney. Fox News ran things much more for Romney. I tried to find one for 2020 and, it's definitely interesting kind of came out that way for how the coverage looked. Obviously, yes, bias is there. The question is, in what way? Obviously, there's a lot of ideological biases by, who you support. Is it more liberal, conservative? You can call it pro-government or patriotic kind of stuff, like kind of saying patriot, that kind of those kind of things. Those kind of stuff. You can look at corporate idea biases, like helping out one company, the sensationalist biases, trying to get people to watch the stories, even racial bias, focus on who you're focusing on. So here's interesting, you kind of see, this is interesting, kind of just looked at, how these 2 photos look here in cap. A young man walks through Chesapeake floodwaters after looting a grocery store. Here's 2 residents wade through after finding food at a store. So like that, those little terminology might look very, very different here. Did these guys loot a store? We don't know. But how you look at the story and then look at, what it is could be part of that. It could be a racial bias in terms of African American versus white people. And so, you see those kind of biases come out that way on some of our materials. Biggest thing, guys, how do you do this? Number 1, figure out why they're running a story. Okay, so like figure out why this company is running a story. They're running it for ads, running it for money, running it to support a candidate. How representative of an expert or popular opinion story in the quoted. So let's make sure that they actually look at expert opinions that are present. Look at the adjectives being used. Look at how like they're describing people in it. What type of source they're being used. They're using like known sources, all liberal or conservative sources, so on and so forth. And make sure you look at how many sides each they cover. Are there perspectives left out of your story? Remember, biases are going to be everywhere, but knowing that you know about them will be a big boost to you guys later on. That's what we got for media, everybody. Thank you for your attention and time and checking out our ideas on media. We'll discuss this when we get back from our break. Thanks a lot, everybody. You're awesome.